Vladimir Putin's meeting with Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico this week highlights the Kremlin's strategic reliance on energy diplomacy and its attempts to exploit divisions within Europe. Fico, one of the few EU leaders openly friendly with Russia since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, has tried to get assurances on continued gas supplies, and this comes as Ukraine plans to terminate its gas transit agreement with Russia at the end of the year, potentially cutting off billions in revenue for Moscow. And despite Fico's overtures, his visit has been widely criticised, both domestically and by European leaders such as the Ukrainian President Zelensky and the Czech President Petr Pavel for undermining EU unity against Russian aggression. The expiring gas transit deal has created a precarious situation for Slovakia, heavily dependent on Russian gas, and it faces a potential energy crisis if that gas is stopped. But Fico's willingness to secure deals directly with Putin not only raises moral questions about funding Russia's war machine, but also fragments Europe's united front against Russia. Putin must be rubbing his hands with glee, or rubbing his hands to try and get warm inside the Smeg fridge. As Zelensky notes, Fico's actions play directly into Putin's hands by weakening EU solidarity. Putin's economic leverage through energy is waning, with Russia's energy sector hit hard by sanctions and Europe's gradual weaning off Russian gas, and this makes Fico's overtures more of a desperate gambit for Slovakia than a strategic win for Moscow. Yet it showcases the Kremlin's ability to maintain influence through gas politics, even as its economy hemorrhages under international pressure. So as I say, Putin's rubbing his hands, go on, get warm, blow on it, or blow anyway. And I'm sure Fico's doing enough blowing. Maybe Putin will get a little warm in time, but I think the icicles are forming. Parallel to these developments, the Kremlin is ramping up its crackdown on digital platforms, particularly YouTube. Russian authorities have intensified efforts to slow down and block access to the platform, which remains a critical source of independent information for Russians in the middle of this state-controlled media mess. Recent reports indicate that YouTube traffic in Russia has dropped to 20% of its usual levels because of the government-imposed restrictions, sparking a surge in VPN downloads. The digital Iron Curtain illustrates Moscow's fear of losing its grip on domestic narratives, especially as platforms like YouTube serve as hubs for dissent and external perspective. The Kremlin's campaign to curb access has led to a flourishing black market of VPN services, highlighting the Russian populace's resilience in circumventing censorship. And despite YouTube's slowdowns, Russian trolls remain a visible presence on global platforms, amplifying the Kremlin's propaganda. This highlights the duality of Moscow's strategy, stifling domestic consumption, stifling domestic dissent, while flooding international discourse with state narratives. The irony is palpable. You might think the slowdowns would silence the trolls, but their prolific activity suggests Moscow prioritizes external manipulation over domestic access to independent media. In St. Petersburg, there's obviously lots of VPNs which allow the troll farms to access channels like mine. It's extraordinary. Dmitry Peskov's statements reiterate Moscow's insistence on achieving its objectives in Ukraine, even as gas-dependent economy faces further blows to the Russian system. The Kremlin's assertion that it remains open to peace talks is belied by its simultaneous advancement of military operations, its suspension of dissent at home, and its striking yet again of Kyiv today. I was looking at a video made by Colin Robertson this morning, and there in the background you could hear the missiles exploding somewhere. Putin's meeting with Fico, this warm handshake, this little blow, this little puff, and the escalation of YouTube censorship underscore Moscow's dual reliance on energy leverage and information control. Yet the backlash from Slovakia's citizens, the protests in Slovakia, and the increasing VPN use among Russians, particularly younger Russians, suggest cracks in these strategies. People may not be openly protesting, but secretly they're digging away. In the end, Russia's efforts to secure its war chest and silence independent voices may yield diminishing returns, both economically and politically.